recording. Unmute. Oh my god. The Mighty Mighty Palestones have fallen to the woke mob. It's a dark day in Boston history. They're from Boston, right? That's what they called that?
I think, yeah, that's why they're called the Bosstones.
Okay.
Right, Alex?
Well, the thing is, no one knows. No one knows where they're from. And that's a lot of
Really?
the appeal.
No, that's made up.
I don't know. I
they're
just
a
said
Boston-
it on the radio.
They're a Boston ska band. That's
I didn't know they
I'll have to look
is.
into that more, but I'm loving this new song.
Does any band ever quit, like, making music? Like, this thing with the Eve 6 guy, they're just still playing. You know, it's funny, but it raises this question, like, do they have to keep playing live music to, like, make money? Is that what's going on? Because, like, the Mighty Mighty Palestones are, like, from 20 years ago at least.
30. Well, here's the thing, Jake. If everybody's going to make a George Floyd song, you don't want to be the one band not making a George Floyd song, because then it's kind of like, what aren't you saying about George Floyd, you know?
Yeah, about Georgie, our pal Georgie. who
They
we
call him
Georgie. Good lord.
That's Boston slang. It's a term of endearment in Boston for people named George.
There's the only Boston slang is slurs. And so I'm assuming that's what it is.
I just love it. Like, first of all, this is a very late entry for a George Floyd protest song.
Yeah, that was a year ago.
I think you know what? I bet they wrote it a year ago, and then the record label was like, you know what? Why don't we wait until
Let's wait till this cools down, fellas.
Yeah. If anyone listening hasn't seen the video, I implore you, please look it up and watch, because it's very visual. It's just one guy in a black suit skanking across, I guess, Boston.
Call it what it is. He's skanking. He's skanking for equality.
And then there's like the lyrics of the video are written across these brick walls that he's skanking past. So it's like, Georgie, they took your breath away. Which is...
I just love it's so late, and then it has this energy of like, well, we want to put out a song everybody's gonna like, and they're just like calling him nicknames, and everyone's skanking across Boston.
Yeah. No, they're actually going to do a team up album with David Guetta.
Yeah.
All about
Collabo.
George Guebo, whatever his name is. Guetta.
Wow.
Mighty Mighty Palestones collabo.
Can you imagine what that would sound like? Has anyone ever made ska techno before?
It can't be done.
Yeah.
Yeah, is it like dividing by zero or something?
Yeah.
Philosophers say it cannot be done.
Yeah.
So apparently
Alchemy.
they were on hiatus from 04 to 06 and then reunited in 2007 and have been back together ever since. Like, there are hundreds, not thousands, of bands who have split up and, formed and broken up again and again in that time since 2007 that they have reunited as a band and gone on their reunion thing. So they're way past their due. I'm shocked that they're still doing it.
I look forward to their Israel-Palestine song, which will come out in 2 years.
Oh, yeah. How's that one go?
It's a complicated scenario, and you can't really claim either side. And Greta Thunberg is gay.
had right to exist,
There you go.
but I leave you feeling dissed.
You're doing
if you
woke
get me
Al.
feeling pissed. Yeah.
Get it?
Oh, those
Woke
are really good rhymes, Anders.
Al. Where you woke up a song by changing the lyrics. Okay, so wait, so this is interesting because this came out today and it was very funny and stuff. But like, someone told me that that their song "Never Had to Knock on Wood" was like about AIDS. So I guess they just make music like this all the time.
Yeah, for whatever reason, we talked about this for like 10 minutes on Ballin' Out this week. But yeah, what a subtle song about AIDS. They went really the other direction for the George Floyd song.
Why
I
didn't
thought that was about I remember thinking it was about drugs as a kid, and then I asked like a friend of mine who was really, really into ska, and he was like, "It's about trying things that you're scared of, man. It's
That's
about
true.
not challenging yourself and being scared of life."
Oh.
Getting AIDS is a challenge for many people.
Well, as we're going to learn in our interview today, we are AIDS, according to some people. So that's cool.
That will make sense later.
Why didn't they make a song about COVID? Because
Maybe they
COVID's
did.
also a yeah, you know what? I haven't
If
heard
we
the
haven't
album.
heard the album, we can't say, Jake.
There's like a Dr. Fauci song, which in the video is just skanking Fauci. All right, hold on, I'm on board. That sounds fucking cool.
He's a fan. He's a Boston's guy.
You know what? Music can be fun.
Fauci is a rude boy. That's what I think.
Honestly, maybe Fauci is referenced in what "Knock on Wood" or what was the title of the song? I don't remember, but because he was
The impression that I get.
the impression that I get because he was
A Heart in a Blender song.
also in the CDC. He had like the same job basically during the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, there's
So
a
maybe they reference him in there.
Fauci's hilarious because there's a documentary called How to Survive a Plague that's about
Yeah.
him overseeing the fucking AIDS crisis, and it doesn't focus on him like he's the main character necessarily, but he's heavily involved in it, and it's very funny if you watch it because you really realize that he's like a tragic figure in that back then he fucked that up by not like treating it with the gravity that was required. And everyone back then in the government was just like, that's just fucking New York queers or whatever.
Right. They laughed at, like there was a press conference with one of the Reagan dudes and they asked him about it and like the journalists couldn't even keep it together. They were all just laughing and laughing like, do you have it?
Yeah.
Pathetic.
It's fucking stupid. And but now, like during the COVID thing, it's like he's like went to hell, and it's that type of hell where the devil gives you like an exact punishment according to what you did in your life or whatever, or like a Saw scenario or something. Because he's like at the beginning of the pandemic a year ago, he was like, "It's real, I swear it's real," and like no one would listen to him. It's really funny. We should make a ska concept album about Dr. Fauci.
I'm on it.
Do you know?
Way ahead
Sure.
of you.
I'll play sax.
I'm learning the trombone. It will take 4 to 6 years, and we will be ready for a Dr. Fauci song.
That's a tradition in ska. There's a Catch-22 concept album about the life of Leon Trotsky.
Oh, nice.
It's really weird.
Okay.
It's like
I'm on
apolitical. They just
Yeah, it's just about how good he was at fucking.
I mean, a bunch of people who are just fascinated by Leon Trotsky because he's a fascinating guy and don't.
He's
really have
cool.
yeah, he's a weirdo.
He was the first one to have like glasses, but be like, I still kill people with a
Right.
gun sometimes.
I have a leather jacket and glasses. Yeah.
Don't just assume because of my glasses that I won't form the Red Army.
Yeah. Don't just assume I'm not tough because I look like who's that actor? Barton Fink, the guy who played the
Oh,
Jesus.
Yeah,
John
the
Turturro?
actor Barton Fink.
Turturro.
Oh, he should play Trotsky.
Dude, he totally should. He also looks like Gabe Pacheco. Also,
Yes, true.
So
You know,
many
there-
people.
There were actually there's a Netflix series from Russian television. I don't think it's the network I work for, so I can shit on it. But it's on Netflix. They made a series about Trotsky, and the first episode's really good. And then you realize the agenda behind it. It's extremely
The
anti-Trotsky.
anti-Trotsky agenda.
they're
Yeah.
always trying to come for our trots.
Right.
Stop
Sadly.
eating my trots. It's Napoleon Dynamite. All right, I'm done with that bit. Also, speaking of him and things that frame him certain ways, remember we read the book The Young Stalin for the show? Something they
Yes.
mentioned in there is that he escaped from Siberia on a reindeer one time, which I think is really cool.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
God.
So sick.
A
All
whole
right.
fleet or just one?
I don't know. It
Didn't
would be
say.
cool if he was like straight up Santa Claus and he had them all dragging a sled. But I don't know. I'll have to read
The
more.
knowledge isn't there. We'll have to go back and do a Trotsky episode.
Yeah.
But this week,
We're talking about something much more depressing and not fun. This would be you can't even liven this up with the bright horn section of a ska band. This shit is fucked up, yo.
Just you wait. Mighty Mighty Palestones will find a way.
Yeah.
Give them time.
Yeah.
I can see Andrew Yang dancing to ska music when someone tries to ask him about Israel, Palestine.
If there was
to get out of it, he's just like.
If he was running for mayor of a community or of a city where there was a community that culturally ska music was part of it, like Boston, maybe Boston.
Let's just say when he runs for mayor of Boston, that will be something we'll be covering.
Yeah, he will.
When this doesn't work out because he blew it on the Israel question and then has to run for Boston and is like, I love Dunkin' or whatever he's up to over there.
Yeah, I love Dunkin' Donuts. And then he starts playing the George Floyd song and skanking and going, look, I learned about police and stuff. Okay. Well, let's talk about Israel and Palestine with our guest, Abby Martin.
Lock them into positions of hopelessness and helplessness. The government gives them the drugs, builds bigger prisons, passes a 3-strike law, and then wants us to sing God Bless America. No, no, no. Not God Bless America. God damn America. That's in the Bible for killing innocent people. God damn America for treating us citizens as less than human. God damn America as long as she tries to act like she is God and she is supreme.
Okay.
I want a separate combo.
Do a bonus episode about this.
All right. Let's start. We are now joined by creator of the Empire Files, podcaster at Media Roots News, filmmaker of the documentary Gaza Fights for Freedom, which you can watch on Means TV, our pals over there. Abby Martin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to have you. I imagine you're in high demand this week because everyone's losing their goddamn minds.
Mixed feelings about that?
Yeah, shit's really popped off.
Okay, so obviously we're going to talk about what's happening in Israel/Palestine this week. The country that is two countries or whatever.
Two great tastes.
Yeah, it's like a Go-Gurt or something. So basically, we're a show for idiots, so we're going to start off real basic. Can you walk us through the basic events that led up to what is happening this week with riots and with the evictions and everything like that? Where would this start?
Absolutely. So it started in 1948.
No, we're not going
there. No, just joking. Started with the Bible. No, just kidding. But on a side note, really quickly, Gaza Fights for Freedom is actually free on YouTube right now. You can check out our Empire Files YouTube channel and watch it there. So it's also available on Means TV, and then Arabic and Spanish subtitles are available on Vimeo. So the current situation, of course, began. People may have seen that hashtag going around, Save Sheikh Jarrah. It's a neighborhood in East Jerusalem, which is under brutal and illegal military occupation. So just like the West Bank, which has been atomized by illegal settlements, and all of those are illegal under international law, East Jerusalem is also under Israeli military law. So you can't hold a flag, you can't pass out political literature, you can't convene in groups of 10 or more. All these things are illegal and subject you to arrest and put into Israeli military prisons. So all of that in mind, it is very brave that people are even protesting what's going on. About 2 weeks ago or so, we saw armed extremist settlers going through the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah and actually violently expelling people from their homes. So taking people's belongings, throwing them out of the homes. People are screaming, they're pulling people out and taking over their homes and forcefully ejecting them. They have been kind of waiting for a green light to do this. The West Bank, we see people do this every day. Homes are demolished. Israeli settlers who are armed and extreme go and seize homes, move on top of Arab villages, and then they're provided political cover from Israeli soldiers. This is a little bit more extreme because it's just in the middle of a city. You know, it's not just out in these kind of expansive villages and stuff like that. And so a lot of these extremist settlers have just been waiting for their moment. They've been trying to fight through the courts to expel these last families that remain in these homes. And they finally just did it, right? And they came out 1,000 strong, chanting death to Arabs and going on this rampage. Palestinians protested in response, which is illegal. You can't protest if you're a Palestinian living under this rule. And so IDF soldiers came brutalizing, you know, violently oppressing the protests. This all led to Al-Aqsa Mosque. You know, if you're in Jerusalem, a lot of these holy sites are all right next to each other. You have the Wailing Wall, you have Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the most ancient mosques, or, you know, in the world. I mean, this is an architecture that is 100 years older than the Notre Dame Cathedral. Remember, all the historians were crying and throwing tens of millions of dollars when that was on fire. Well, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is the third holiest site in Islam. And you had worshippers there during Ramadan praying, hundreds of them, and Israeli soldiers came in, raided the mosque, threw stun grenades and smoke bombs, and sent hundreds of these people to the hospital, and then gassed the hospital, which is a war crime. And they justified it by saying that there were people outside throwing rocks at them. So then you see, and there's several different organizations that are involved in this that I know you wanted to talk about too, but like then you saw just 10,000 people or so like chanting outside of Al-Aqsa Mosque while it burns, chanting death to Arabs and burn their memory. And I want to just like pose to people how just ludicrous this is if you compare it to like any other people's. Like, you know, Trump and his supporters are so offensive to liberal sensibilities here in the US. Imagine if an armed extremist mob of Trump supporters was raiding an immigrant community in Texas, violently expelling them from their homes and taking them over by force. What would the media be saying about that? Or imagine if armed Muslim extremists went and raided an ancient synagogue and chanting death to Jews. Yeah. I mean, it's just so cartoonishly over the top that it just really exposes just the sheer hypocrisy of the US media, of just how blatantly they cover for the Israeli government no matter what. And so, of course, Hamas, which is the governing party of the Gaza Strip, was issuing a warning saying, if you continue this violent offense in Jerusalem, we will respond with rockets. And they did. And Israel issued a wildly disproportionate response, as they always do, and started targeting Hamas members' homes, residential homes and neighborhoods, with their entire families sleeping inside and bombing the fuck out of them and killing entire families.
Yeah,
so that's what we saw happen.
The propaganda is always kind of the most fascinating thing to me because, like, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good point. It's very ironic given that our own country is so much of it is filled with like people who just like buy guns all day and then fantasize about what if the government broke into my house. I would go so fucking crazy, you know, and imagining this oppression, but somehow can't like recontextualize and see that that is basically what is happening to Palestinians.
Like the stand your ground fanatics.
Yeah. So like, I don't know, we'll get into this later, but I'm really fascinated by like the way that the selling it kind of works with like, you know, the victimization of the actual oppressor or whatever. But go ahead, Anders.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just like that's the strangest thing. It's the justification. So much of it comes from hypothetical deaths. Like Israelis and the U.S. media will say, well, you can't really look at the body count because hypothetically, if they could, the Palestinians supposedly would kill every Israeli Jew, which it's just, you know, that could mean you could take that in any direction. Like that's like the O.J. Simpson trial, them saying like, well, if Nicole Brown Simpson had O.J. in a body cast, she would have smothered him to death, or some like thing that just is completely unrelated to the actual reality of the situation that doesn't apply in any other context.
Yeah.
Super fascinating point. Yeah, it's all based on a hypothetical scenario to just carry out ongoing war crimes. Like when you hear Israel's right to self-defense, it really just means Israel has the blanket right to just commit atrocities.
Yeah. In the interviews you did in Gaza Fights for Freedom, somebody's bring up this point. And they're talking about how like the children in Palestine are killed in like the thousands, and somehow it's a footnote in history, But if like one Israeli person, turns an ankle or something because somebody threw a rock at them, it's like this international crisis. It's a very hypocritical, obviously to us, but I don't know. I'm just fascinated with how the other side of this sees this.
I think it's such a deep levels of deep-seated racism and dehumanization of brown people. That's the only way that I could really wrap my mind around it. The fact that like 1 million dead Iraqis is just like a drop in the bucket, and people are like, well, the Iraq war was bad. It's like, do you really can you like take stock at the loss of human fucking life and like understand what that means? It's the same kind of thing here. It's like, just because Palestinians are brown and they're depicted as, like basically so dehumanized that they actually like when their children die. That's what Netanyahu says, is that they want their children to pile up with dead bodies of kids to be telegenically dead, so they can just have the more dead, the better for their cause. Can you imagine dehumanizing people in such a way that they actually want their kids to die?
Yeah, it reminds me of, I think I just have Iraq war on the brain right now because of, I don't know, all these, for some reason there's just an echo happening culturally right now. But, when I was growing up, I had friends that went off to fight in Iraq, and like, they're just kids, so they're idiots, so they're easily indoctrinated. And I remember the way that they would talk about the people that they were killing it's really similar. I was thinking about it a lot when I was watching your documentary, and there's that part where there's footage of the sniper and the way he's like joking about the kid that he's like picking which person to assassinate with his like sniper rifle or whatever. I don't know, truly scary stuff. But let's talk a little bit more.
Can I ask a basic question? So this is just for further elaboration, because like I don't claim to like know a ton about Middle Eastern politics in general. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the resettlement movement? So these people who are moving to the West Bank and just throwing people out of their homes, and then that spread to the cities. The closest analog I can think of for that is like an old one. Like I think of like Manifest Destiny or something like that. What are the differences between maybe an American resettlement program and the Israeli one?
Yeah, it's a good point. And Jake, to your point also, just about the extension of just genocidal mentality that a lot of Americans share as well. We're a nation, a settler colonial state that's founded on the expulsion and genocide of the native people. It would be similar to like as if this was still going on today. Native people are just out of sight, out of mind. But you can see how that extension, basically spills over into a settler colonial state like Israel, that its entire existence, the foundation of Zionism, is based on an artificial majority of a Jewish population. So, for example, in East Jerusalem, there's a demographic law that says that there has to be 70% Jews versus 30% Palestinian or Arabs. So what does that mean? That means that in order to maintain this artificial majority, it needs to be predicated on the ongoing ethnic cleansing of the indigenous peoples. The settlement movement, it is similar to like the Manifest Destiny here. It's just so shocking now because we're allegedly like a civilized society, and we should know better than to be doing this. But there is a law in place that basically if you have ancestral or heritage that is Judaism in any sense of the word, and you can prove that you have Jewish heritage, you have the right to become an Israeli citizen. You can either move to Israel within the 48 boundaries, or you can just move to an Arab village and just move in and either set up an illegal like trailer. All of this is illegal under international law, but there's even settlements that are illegal under Israeli law, that you can go and just set up like a tractor trailer home and just immediately get provided military cover and like electrical support and power. These are the extremist of the extremists. This is like the most extreme people. If you really want to go and fucking like move on top of a Palestinian village, like in a legal settlement, like that's you're pretty sociopathic, because you really just want to like go and like torture the people and like make them want to leave. But a lot of people will just go and move to Tel Aviv, or like, there's hundreds of miles of like arid land that isn't even developed and doesn't have Palestinian villages on it. So you have to ask yourself, why are you going and moving on top of a Palestinian village? You obviously want to torture and oppress the people who are living there already. It's not about coexistence or living in peace. But they want to paint the extremist settlers that we're talking about as the aberration, as something that is somehow different from Israeli society. And you will even see government officials sometimes condemn the extremists, like the ones who will go in mobs and actually like burn down Palestinian homes and kill people in mobs of groups like we're seeing now, like marauding gangs chanting death to Arabs and expelling people from their homes. But as we're seeing as clear as day right now, this is spilling over to all of Israeli society. It's not just Jerusalem, it's not just the West Bank, and it's not just groups like the equivalent of the KKK there, this group called Lahava. It's actually just a lot of Israeli citizens in general, and this is within Israel proper. This is within neighborhoods like Haifa, where people are going and literally pulling people out of cars. They have to scream, "I'm not Arab," in order to not be beat to death. I've seen people lynched on camera. There's little girls that look like they're sorority girls holding Israeli flags, like jumping up and down on like the ruins of an Arab business that they have just looted, and beating people with Israeli flagpoles and stuff. I mean, it's pretty horrifying, and I think that sadly it's become so pervasive, because when you have to maintain a settler colonial state that continues to ethnically cleanse people, you have to indoctrinate yourself to a certain degree where it's so deep. Like the brainwashing is so fucking deep that you have to think these people are subhuman in order for it to be okay for you to live there and participate in society, which is why I think 95% of Israeli citizens are probably Zionists. I would be shocked if it was a lower amount than that. And if you're anti-Zionist, how could you live there? How could you actually live in Israel? You know what I mean?
It's the state of the Zionist project. So that would be a bad decision.
I mean, I'm kind of curious about that, because I think what a lot of people don't understand, because Israel uses the defense of like, well, if you criticize Israel, you're criticizing Jews. This conflate those two things, it creates an interesting question, which is like, wait a minute, I know plenty of Jews in America who think Israel's bad. So is this actually just the government that we're talking about as opposed to the population or the populace or whatever? Or is it that, yes, the government has indoctrinated everyone who lives there so much? Like, are there dissenters within Israel, or is that that situation where if you did think that, you just wouldn't fucking live there?
I think, yeah. I mean, of course, there are dissenters there. Like every time that Israel goes on an assault of Gaza or doing something like this, you'll see people protesting. It'll be a very small contingent of Israelis that protest. When I was there and interviewing people, I think that you watched the full video, Jake, of just me having kind of man on the streets in West Jerusalem, and I spoke to someone who said, "I'm a leftist." Being
God,
leftist
no.
is a slur. That is a slur in Israeli society, and I think the occupation is good, but it needs to be more humane. Right. And I think that really encompasses like a broader sect of society, is like the notion of what it is to be a liberal Zionist. It's kind of like the whole fake woke shit here, where like Biden, like you see the superficiality and the exploitation of identity politics, and you think that you're woke without having any sort of significant structural systemic change or policies that affect the material conditions of like the actual oppressed populations in this country. And that's exactly what it is there. It's like window dressing, where you can be like, oh, Palestinians should be treated better. No, of course they shouldn't have equal rights, because I am a liberal Zionist, which means I still believe in an explicitly Jewish state that subjugates and denies basic democratic rights for the 5 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. But I still like am a progressive. You know what I mean? Like I'm LGBTQ friendly. Tel Aviv is this hot spot for fucking the gay pride parade and da-da-da. And that's why you see people just put this fucking facade up time after time. And you see this reflected in polls across Israeli society as well. Like the shoot to kill order at the Gaza border, 95% of Israelis supported the onslaught, the massacre in Gaza in 2014. 80 to 90% of people support the shoot to kill order. The vast majority support the ongoing occupation, and on and on and on. And the anti-Zionists that I have spoken to and that I know do exist, they are repulsed. they flee. A lot of these people have access to go to other countries. They have passports. A lot of them are like European roots or whatever. The Israeli-born ones, like my friend Ronnie Barkin, he's fucking out of there, man. I mean, it's not only because he can't stand being there, he's in danger. He's in danger of being there. My friends David Sheen and Dan Cohen, two Jewish people who were living in the West Bank, they got assaulted at a rally because they weren't wearing an Israeli flag as a cape. Like, you have to be like so fucking hyper nationalist
because they weren't wearing an Israeli flag as a cape.
Yeah, they were like, "Where's your fucking flags, dude?" And then they basically threatened to beat their asses. And just one more point to drive this home: there was a soldier caught on camera a couple of years ago named Elor Azaria, who disarmed a Palestinian guy who had a knife, allegedly. The guy's on camera, totally disarmed. They had totally stabilized the situation, and this soldier just went up and shot him in the skull and executed him. Plain as day. People were just milling around acting as if it was nothing. This caused a huge uproar, not in Israeli society, but in the international community. So to put pressure on Israel, they felt like they had to do something. So they slapped this guy on the wrist, put him on house arrest. There was such an uproar and a backlash within Israeli society that this mild punishment was put on this Israeli soldier for killing who they called a terrorist. There was huge fucking rallies, 10,000 people strong in the streets of Tel Aviv, chanting, "Death to the Arabs, death to the leftists, death to the videographers," because they feel, and this is a phrase as well, that leftists are the AIDS and Arabs are the common cold. Unless you get rid of the AIDS, you cannot fulfill the extermination of Arabs, because the leftists are the ones who are blocking you to do so. So it is actually fucking dangerous to be openly anti-Zionist and even to call yourself a leftist, even if you are a liberal Zionist there.
Well, one of the things that I feel like
AIDS? Were AIDS or the cold? I got mixed up there.
Well, it's interesting, the history, too, because I feel like the international left for the first, 30, 40 years of Israel was sort of supportive, because like kibbutzim is like sort of a quasi-socialist idea. So people in like the U.S. would be like, "Oh, that sounds good." And then in like the early 80s, some more information started coming out about what Israel was actually doing to the people they were occupying. And now we have a situation where, like, and I've heard this a lot, that there really is no left, as you're saying, in Israel. There's a right, there's a far right, and then there's just absolute maniacs. And something you hear a lot from American Israeli supporters is that, like, "Oh yeah, I support Israel, but Netanyahu, he's a crank.
Right.
I don't like him at all. I wish he would go." And it seems kind of like a convenient thing, right? Because this is obviously predates Netanyahu by a lot. But he's not even the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Israeli nationalists. But now he's in a situation where I think he was indicted on corruption charges, and he keeps being able to postpone that and continues to use these sort of bombardments as an excuse and a reason to stay in power. Some people are saying, "Oh, it's looking like he might go," but that probably won't make any difference. If any, is there a chance that things will even get worse for Palestinians under a different government?
Yeah, I mean, you just hit it on the head right there. There is no opposition party that is valid. I mean, they have a couple token seats of like Arabs holding Knesset seats. But yeah, I mean, the liberal left, quote unquote, political wing has been so fucking obsolete for so many decades now that this notion of a two-state solution that is still touted, hilariously touted by U.S. politicians. Meanwhile, they condemn, the liberals, like in the Biden administration and the people running for the Democratic primary, all condemned the right-wing Netanyahu government because they couldn't explain away why there was such a tight partnership with the Trump administration. Why was it that Jared Kushner had a home in his fucking New York penthouse for Netanyahu when he came to town? Why is it that Netanyahu was running on re-election with giant banners of him shaking Trump's hand? Why is it that they were naming settlements after him? So the liberals couldn't explain that. So they had to just pretend like, oh, Netanyahu's extreme, right? Just like Trump. Trump doesn't represent America.
Right.
Trump is just this crazy extreme distortion of what America is. And in fact, it was fake news that made Trump won. And oh no, Netanyahu is just totally does not represent Israeli society. Well, in fact, it's the opposite. Netanyahu does, in fact, represent Israeli society. In fact, his contender in the election, his main opponent, Benny Gantz, in the last election, was equally as genocidal. This was a guy who committed war crimes when he was like at the IDF. Every single Israeli citizen has to join the IDF mandatorily. I mean, this is a brainwashing and conditioning that we're talking about from birth. Segregated schools, and yeah, I mean, just knowing that you have to be okay with the situation in order to even live your life. But yeah, Netanyahu absolutely represents the true sense of Israeli society. And the only reason people want him out is because they're just fucking sick of him because he's been there for so fucking long.
Yeah,
I mean, he probably is corrupt as hell.
You can see like how effective the indoctrination is in that person on the street segment you did, those interviews, because like I guess what was fascinating to me about that is that those are passive members of society. Those are not the people that are out when you just walk around Tel Aviv or something and you just grab these like random college-aged kids and go, hey, what do you think of Palestinians? And they're just like, well, you have to exterminate them or whatever. That's like not someone who is, actually, maybe necessarily actively engaged in any way in doing that. They're just, they believe all the propaganda and stuff. And it's like, it was hilarious to watch because like one of those guys was wearing a Sons of Anarchy shirt that he like clearly grabbed off the rack at like some mall. They're all walking around in like an open-air mall. He's got like Hot Topic jewelry on, and that is a person who does not even know who they are. I mean, that's what that sort of like signaling means. And so all it takes is just a current, to push people that are that passive in a direction. And if you have enough of them, there you go. You have a society, and you have something as dumb as the way we believe the stuff that our own news sort of shoves down our throat or whatever. So I mean, that combined with the political reality of it not being safe for there to be a left and for there being like just entirely cohesive right wing government.
Well, at least
people should. Yeah, go ahead. Anders.
Well, I can't believe I'm about to. Anders, thank you. But I can't believe I'm about to defend America. But I feel like if you did a similar man on the street thing here, like half the people would be like, I don't know, like not
like don't even know what's going on. They're like, we're in the Middle East,
right? Which is honestly better than just being like diehard racist fanatic, Well,
and we don't need those people. I don't know.
Right.
Well, I asked people to watch this segment because everyone who watches it is, of course, horrified, as well you should be, because these people are just openly espousing, very casually, genocide and ethnic cleansing, knowing they're on fucking camera, knowing they're talking to a U.S. journalist that is going to put this on the internet.
Yeah, it's like watching Borat or something, where you're like, are they seriously saying that into the camera?
Yeah, someone made a good point. They're like, if this were like some sort of dystopian sci-fi movie, it would be like too on the nose. Like the writers would be like, no one would like laugh and be like, we need to kill Arabs. Like no one would do that. That's too crazy.
That one guy says like, you gotta carpet bomb him, and then he goes, like he shrugs afterwards. After describing carpet bombing someone.
Yeah, no, it's insane. Watching the full video, people are like, oh, you just cherry pick these people. You probably spent hours and hours and just, scourged through all these interviews and then just like compiled them to make people look the absolute worst. And it's like, actually, shockingly, no. We had just come from spending a month in the West Bank. We spoke to hundreds of Palestinians. No one said anything remotely close to this. It was just people saying, we want to live in equality, we want peace, and we want the occupation to end. Then we stepped foot in West Jerusalem for 3 hours. We were there in this open air mall, like you said, and we showed every single person that we talked to in the full video. And everyone had that same kind of mentality. And it is very harrowing because this is what I hear from everyone who lives there long term. This is a very commonplace attitude. I think that Americans, we don't understand what our government is doing. A lot of people just have no fucking clue what the U.S. empire is doing around the world and all the people it's killing and stuff. And so, but the people who do somehow justify that as well. But this is so much crazier because they feel like they can rationalize this danger and threat and therefore this mentality of just like open genocidal bloodlust, and they think that Americans will commiserate with them. That's why they're just like, what? Like, yeah, we need to get rid of these fucking people. Let's carpet bomb them and kill them.
The thing about the American empire is this is all on wheels at this point. Like, you don't need every guy at Hot Topic to be down with the Iraq war. You just do it while they're at Hot Topic.
Right.
Israel is like 1,000th of our size. They need all hands on deck for this, and they've done it. They have like the complete cultural project completed. You know, that you have to join the military. If you're a leftist, you are literally chased out of the country by a mob for not wearing the right cape. The institutions are there, you know? Which is why my question for what's happening this week is how much of this is direct, like, state programming and how much of this is, like, grassroots reactionary, crystal knocked type shit. Yeah.
Well, the first mob that was coming out in Sheikh Jarrah and pulling people out of their homes, this was organized by a group called La Hava. And I'm sure a lot of these groups that are that are just explicitly fascist do have state backing, because you see this mentality reflected in not only Netanyahu, but with several other cabinet ministers and government officials that are just openly pledging to commit war crimes, saying we're going to level the Gaza Strip, we're going to put it on fire, we're going to take down, this is the first of many residential towers, like committing like mini 9/11s like every day across Gaza. But La Hava is basically the KKK. They were the ones who started going out there. And then it just became about the temple movement. So all the people chanting in front of Al-Aqsa Mosque, they are part of a very religious extremist organization that wants to see the Al-Aqsa Mosque demolished and wants to replace it with a temple because they think it'll bring like their own, the rapture and the second coming of Christ. This is why like a lot of Christian evangelicals want this too and support Israel here in the US. But then it became just way beyond that. I mean, it became a completely organic uprising across all of Israel. And that's what's so disturbing, is that this is what we're told by Israeli society and the government is like the democracy, right? Like within Israel, Christian, Jews, Muslims, they all live together in peace and they all have a democracy, right? This is why this big uproar about like that Saturday Night Live joke and all this stuff. It's like, no, like everyone's treated fairly. This is the only democracy in the Middle East. Right. But that's why this is just exposes and unmasks that to such an extreme degree, because this is Israel. And you see everyone package. Going, this is the package deal. And Arabs are actually now, there's lynch mobs, there's people being pulled out of their cars and all this shit and being beaten to death. But Arabs are coming from all over the area to try to protect Palestinians in their homes because they're all in fear of their lives right now. But this is the truth that they don't want you to see. This is what's sanitized to us from our U.S. media.
Yeah. I mean, just the democracy in the Middle East thing is such a perfect cover, because what I keep thinking about is like, even just on paper, without knowing very much about it, how do you sell your average American on blind support for Israel, which is a religious-themed state in the Middle East, and then pit them completely against Iran, which is right next to it and is a different religion-themed state, supposedly like with the same operations. And the difference is you tell them that they get to vote on it. Does it matter that whoever's in charge of this state that is racial supremacy themed does not really matter? No, but Americans fucking love voting. We're drunk on the dial in on your phone for the America's favorite singer kind of model. And if you just tell people they can do that, then who cares what happens after?
Yeah, thrilling like brinksmanship and warfare, which is what's happening with Israel and Iran, which is like really a smokescreen, I think, because like if Israel nuked Iran, which they could, it would just destroy also Israel. It would be terrible for the entire region. It would like fuck up Israeli lives for generations. Like they're not going to do that. The reason they're having this like thing is a distraction from what they're doing to Palestine.
Yeah, I mean, to your point about democracy, Alex, it's like it's such a flimsy pretense that still works, I think, on American audiences, because we teach ourselves in school or our children in school that democracy just means voting. And if you have a crazy state like Israel, where if you're like far enough left, you're threatened to leave and things like that, then that doesn't really function as democracy. And so Americans can't understand democracy outside of this being just this basic, rigid mathematical concept. That's why we don't understand socialism, because we don't understand that socialism is democracy extended to like reality, and economics and things like that. And so
it's just funny right now because no Americans believe democracy is working here right now.
Right.
Then to be like, but they have it too.
Right.
There's nothing
And even
for me.
5 million Palestinians don't have the right to vote. That's what's so interesting is like they forget about the 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank who literally just can't vote. They just live under martial law. So it's like, well, what the fuck are you even talking about when you say it's a democracy?
Right, the aesthetics are the same, right? The politicians kind of look similar. They speak English. They have the same brands in Israel, the same kind of television format. So it looks like American democracy. It is just as, if not more, undemocratic, and it's an apartheid state, which that's I think a term that should be embraced by anybody who has a conscience, really. But
we're both Under Armour states.
Yeah, but apartheid it rubs people the wrong way, I think, because I mean that in a good way, right? Because people remember South Africa. That's most people's associations. But the defenders of Israel will say, "Oh, no, it's nothing like that. You can't say that." But when you get really down to it, it's like, oh, well, because that was a race, and Palestinians are an ethnicity, not a race. Like it's a nonsense distinction. But like, how do we push back against that? I guess and this goes for a lot of things where people try to hinge to some like really technical minor point. How do we push back against that as people who care about the Palestinians?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's getting easier now because for so long, Israel's been able to control the narrative. And like you said before, using that kind of socialist enclave of what, Israel, the kibbutzes and all of those projects that existed back in the day. Well, I think as time went on, fascism certainly took over and the right wing cemented their authority because you can't continue to brutally colonize other people without having that mentality. And so the peace process was really has been a joke for a long time, and there has been no feasibility for a two-state solution for quite some time, and this is admitted by Israeli politicians. I think that organizations like Human Rights Watch, which in the past have been notorious for both siding the issue and making it, it's just a complicated battle of ideas and religions, and even they have finally come out with a conclusive report saying it has gone too far. This is absolutely the definition of apartheid. Right. And we can. I believe
they even said,
right?
Sorry to interrupt, but I believe they even went back to the origins of Israel and said, like, this has been a racist state since its founding. Right.
Absolutely. And you can see that even with Ben-Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, who was one of the founders of Israel. I mean, he said we need to expel the Arabs and take their places. This has always been an openly colonizing force, admitted by pretty much every leader of Israel. And it's just what they've done so successfully, by putting the Jewish star on the flag and this disgusting kind of association with Judaism and trying to conflate Judaism with Zionism, which is just so horrifying because there's so many Jewish groups who have come out and said, we do not endorse apartheid. We do not agree with this. And that's beautiful to see people walking off Birthright and Jewish Voices for Peace and all of those organizations saying, I do not stand next to this. This does not represent me as a Jew. But their conflation with that and their weaponization of anti-Semitism has been so successful, and the exploitation of the Holocaust for so many generations has been, which is horrifying. And anti-Semitism is a huge threat, and it's a huge threat in Europe. But the fact is that our government, and neither does the Israeli government, give a fuck about anti-Semitism. Because they're not doing anything about actual anti-Semitism. They continue to weaponize the notion of anti-Semitism to brutalize and subjugate Palestinians. It's just like shocking. Do you guys actually care about the rise of Nazism? But they've been able to successfully generate this narrative where if you criticize a state that is an apartheid state committing ethnic cleansing, you are a racist and a bigot. And so everyone has been running scared everyone in my journalistic colleagues for the longest time, you know that this is a third rail issue. You know that you just don't touch it. Even Matt Taibbi just told me the other day that he said he was told, yeah, don't fucking go near this subject if you want to be successful in your career.
Yeah, well, that's kind of an interesting segue into something I thought we might talk about, which is like the discourse right now this week, because I've been a little surprised that I, rolled over in bed and looked at my phone the other day and was like, oh, fucking people are actually like criticizing Israel in a way that I don't really remember happening the last time stuff like this happened, maybe back in like 2017 or something when it reached a boiling point like this. And like even to the extent that, the squad, these people that were constantly fucking arguing with each other over whether they're doing the thing that we wanted them to do or not are doing something. And I noticed the other day that AOC came out and she gave Andrew Yang shit over what he said about Israel and how he fucking didn't support Palestine and stuff like that. And then there was like some people that pushed back and said, well, she's not attacking Joe Biden, who actually has power here. This is just like a signal, she's just like, it's lip service or whatever. And then a few hours later, she came out and she said, hey, Joe Biden, this is fucking bullshit and you shouldn't be doing this. And then the goalposts kind of moved on ultra left Twitter to like, well, it's still just lip service because it's just talking and like whatever. And it's so whatever. Twitter's fucking stupid. Like none of this really matters. But I guess what I'm interested in is the third rail thing, because it seems like maybe that's breaking a little bit. Even if you have just the squad talking about this stuff, does that in some way trickle down to changing like it from a thing that is inconceivable to the average passive consumer of news walking around in America? Like, is this going to become a thing, like the way with like the police stuff happened last year? All of a sudden you have like liberals they're still liberals, but they're like ACAB, and you're like, cool, whatever,
I mean, it's a good point. I think that the squad aside, and I do give them major props, the fact that we have a sitting Palestinian member of Congress is like a huge fucking thing, I think, because you cannot denounce her lived experience as a Palestinian who has experienced these things. And actually she was, Israel almost didn't allow her to go into Palestine, a sitting fucking congresswoman. Look at someone like Ilhan Omar, who also has a lived experience of being expelled violently from Somalia, another country that the U.S. is continuing to bomb and obliterate. So the fact that these people are there and speaking on behalf of Palestinians is something that's very huge. You even have Ayanna Pressley, who was like a Warren supporter, coming and signing on to a piece of legislation proposed by Betty McCollum that is trying to condition aid to Israel in accordance with international law, something that shouldn't be controversial whatsoever. But AIPAC is a huge ass lobby, and it's not that AIPAC controls or dictates the US. No, quite the opposite. It's that even though AIPAC is a huge lobby, just like there's so many other big lobbies on the Hill, Israel is a very useful military proxy for the US empire. Biden has even said this a couple decades ago. He was on camera saying if Israel didn't exist, we would need to create it to serve our interests in the region, because we use it for so many things in the Middle East as a staging ground, as a battering ram for all of our operations. And we like to have Israel there, to do whatever we want it to do. So it's just so disgusting that actual anti-Semites have like flipped this around and been like, oh no, Israel controls us. It's like, no, dude, we're fucking using Israel just like we use Colombia, which is called the Israel of Latin America, to do all this shit there. But to your point, I think it is hugely monumental. I think that, basically saying, oh, they're not doing anything is wrong, because anything that's said and done on behalf of Palestinians, especially inside of the political establishment within the confines of DC, is a huge thing. I mean, these people just kind of held this giant floor session where they were showing pictures of dead children and talking about this. And that is amazing. And Palestinians want to see politicians stand in solidarity with them. Yes, of course, they should all support the BDS movement. Yes, of course, that's the answer and the only thing that we can do to make apartheid fall. But I think this is a good step, because they feel that it's untenable to be progressive except for Palestine. And all the liberals who want to maintain this kind of immunity to this horrific thing that's going on, like, they're fucking fake. We know the vast majority of politicians aren't social justice warriors. They don't give a shit about anything that has to do with human rights. Otherwise, they would be speaking out against all sorts of atrocities. The majority of them are just wanting to get into positions of power. And they know how to toe the line, and they know exactly how to do that. When it comes to the media, it's fucking crazy, man. I mean, the third rail thing is totally true. There have been some breakthrough moments, like, a couple of years ago when Gaza was being bombed and the people in Sderot Cinema, the ethnically cleansed village right outside of Gaza's border, it's called Sderot Cinema because they sit there and watch bombs being dropped onto Gaza and eat popcorn and drink beer and have parties watching people get killed.
Oh, I did that during the pandemic at an outdoor movie theater. But we just watched Sweeney Todd. We didn't watch people murder children.
Well, people are murdered in Sweeney Todd.
But the CNN correspondent was like spit on. She was chased out of there, and then she was fired for talking about it. Mark Lamont Hill fired from corporate media for saying Palestine should be free from the river to the sea. You see this time and again. I mean, MSNBC showed the map of that shrinking, the shrinking Palestinian land, those 4 quadrants of the map, and they had to come on air the next day and be like, this map is fake. It's like, what? Like, they know how to keep their job, even if, maybe in their personal lives they know what the truth is. They certainly know that they can't speak the truth, and it is revolting. I mean, it's revolting to actually call yourself a journalist and let these atrocities go unchecked. Because they fucking know better, but then it actually explains it better when you see people like the CNN Jerusalem bureau chief. She's cheering her family members joining the IDF. Posting Twitter photos of her niece joining the IDF and an IDF soldier on a cake and being like, "Yay!" The New York Times bureau chief lives in an ethnically cleansed Palestinian home and mounts operations from there for the bureau. But yeah, I mean, even AP and Reuters, which are supposed to be these impartial news wires that then get editorialized from Washington Post and New York Times and shit, even they just have it's always Palestinians died in this passive voice. Like, well, how did they fucking die? They just dropped dead from a heart attack? Like, yeah. I remember, like even this car ramming attack. Did you guys see that one where a car fucking barreled into 2 Palestinians from a settler? And the headline was like, car crashes and then Palestinians hit it with rocks. It was like, really? Because to me, it looked like the fucking car rammed as a weapon and ran over 2 people, and then a Palestinian hit it with a rock.
The car was using self-defense.
Yeah, right.
Transformers situation.
If a car ran over one of my friends, I would probably hit it with a rock. And I think that's probably justified. Yeah, it's the same shit they do with cops here, the officer-involved shooting and all that stuff.
Yep.
Nothing new. We all know it from our own goddamn country.
The whole thing has a real Star Wars Episode 1 kind of rhyming thing with the police Blue Lives Matter movement in America going on, at least in terms of the cultural backing for it. And I am wondering why politically acceptable options moved to the left this year as opposed to 2017 in terms of journalists covering this. And I'm wondering how much of that is just reflected after the George Floyd protest last year, because there were massive conflagrations in the street here, so people know where public sympathies are lying now with the Palestinians. I don't know.
It's kind of just to add on top of that. I think there are some parallels between the coverage of our own riots and stuff last year and kind of what's happening this week. In that something I've been thinking about a lot when I've been reading about this is that. One thing they'll do is very cleverly frame it as just a two-sided thing. And you think about that versus what happened in the streets last summer between us and the cops, and you go wait a minute, did they that wasn't a two-sided thing. We live here, and those people fucking occupy and fuck with us all day or whatever. This is the same sort of mystification that they use to sell it to people that, hate us and like cops or whatever.
Totally. No, I mean, that's a great point because the media constantly just says oh, it's clashes. Oh, it's skerfuffles. Oh, yeah, there's just 2 sides. Just can't get along. Ha ha ha. How crazy.
And it's so complicated.
We can't ever solve this conflict. Yeah, it's super complicated. Right. You don't want to get into it. It's way too complicated. But yeah, no, it's actually really simple. It's actually one of the most clear-cut issues in the fucking world. It's a colonization, right? There's an oppressor and an oppressed, and there's one side doing the oppressing.
Yeah, with conservative news last year, you would see honestly, it's really similar. You'd see videos of kids lighting up fireworks because this was all happening during the summer, and there was all these extra fireworks laying around, and they'd be like, "Look at them! This is they're launching rockets and they learned how to do this from some evil company and stuff. And it's just this like insane non-reality that still gets across and sells itself to people. Well, let's talk a little bit.
There's also been like a long-standing solidarity movement between Black Americans and Indigenous Americans and Palestinians as well.
Yeah, let's talk about another parallel, actually, that I was thinking about, which is that I'm not sure how true this is, so I'm curious if you know anything about this. I was reading that a lot of the people that are straight up rioting right now, in self-defense and in reaction to this, are kind of like, it's like younger people, and you have like kind of these older, sort of more defeated Palestinians that are just like so scared. They're like, please don't leave the house and don't get involved in this. But there's this natural reaction, which is similar. It's kind of similar to what you saw happen with like us and our resistance to the police last year. And honestly, historically, like with anti-fascism, I mean, this is like, to grab a weird example, I was reading about the Battle of Cable Street the other day in England, similar generational divide. And so for that reason, there's not like an organized political response, I think, as much as it's like organic, which is good and fine, I think. But I say that because they're constantly trying to frame this as a bad political organization, particularly Hamas being the boogeyman, that is the people that are behind literally every fucking stop sign that gets smashed and every window that gets broken or whatever. And it's all somehow rolled into them, being evil and manipulating people or whatever. And clearly Hamas is the boogeyman. Like, clearly that's just a fucking scapegoat we're using to justify literally everything. I mean, you've seen it in like your documentary and stuff, where like they use clever editing to take like this woman who's a medic who's saying, I'm a human shield. Like, and what she's saying is, I'm literally trying to protect people by using my body, but they like reframe it and tell people like, this woman's been indoctrinated by Hamas to be a human shield or whatever. And like, crazy, right? So I guess what I'm getting at, like, one of my big questions about all this, because I don't know like the origins of Hamas. I don't know a lot of shit. I'm a comedian. I have a podcast where I try to learn stuff. But what is the reality? Like, how did Hamas come about? Should we be sympathetic to them, or is this something that just came out of like a power vacuum that is, whose fault is it? Is it good or bad? Does it matter? Would they continue to do this if there was no Hamas? Is it too useful of a tool? I don't know. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, well, to the first part of your point, yeah, we're seeing a lot of youth in the streets right now. It could be because, the notion that existence is resistance for a lot of these older generations of Palestinians who lived through the first and second intifadas and the violent suppression and crackdown on those resistance movements. And they know that they just need to stay in the home. And that is their resistance. It's just existing as Palestinians against a culture, against a people, that is trying to exterminate their culture. So we're seeing a lot of young people. And then in Gaza, it's important to keep in reference that 50% of people who live in Gaza are children. They literally are kids. 75% of them are refugees that were ethnically cleansed from villages just right out of their border. And everything within Gaza is controlled by the Israeli military or the hostile Egyptian military that are collaborators with the Israeli military. If you commit a crime, if you do something that Israel doesn't like and you're put in Israeli military jail, and then you eventually get deported into Gaza, like that is your like eternal punishment, is that you're now just this caged refugee that's just stuck in Gaza. So Gaza was under occupation just like the West Bank is now. There was brutal settler terrorism. There was brutal Israeli military occupation. There were dozens of Israeli military outposts that oppressed people, subjected them to humiliating checkpoints and stuff like that, just like the West Bank is today. And of course, they were also under Israeli military law. There were also tons of settlers living there, just exactly like it was in the West Bank. So this happened in 1967. There was a massive military offensive where Israel seized the West Bank and Gaza and put them under this Israeli military control. And so from 1967 to 2005 or so, that's how long they were occupying Gaza. And the only resistance faction that was armed was Hamas. Hamas was revered in the community because it supplied a lot of resources and was able to help Palestinians in general. They succeeded in driving the Israelis out in 2005, and the Israelis actually had to withdraw. They did not want to give up Gaza. But because the resistance was so high and Hamas was really generating that, they were forced to leave, and the settlers were actually had to be carried out of their homes because they refused to like leave these settlements because they wanted to conquer Gaza, of course. So when they left in 2005, the prestige was very high for Hamas because people respected that they were the only ones actually fighting their colonial occupiers. And so people liked Hamas. I mean, Hamas, the co-founder of Hamas, made very clear. He said, we are not committing terrorism. We are committing acts of resistance against our occupiers. And we use every means necessary, including guns. The next year after the Israeli military left, there was an election. Now, there was a rival party called Fatah that was largely seen as collaborators with the Israeli military. And you can make a good case that they were, in fact, collaborating with the Israeli military, because once this election happened, the first democratic election in Gaza, they knew that Hamas had a high potential of winning. And they actually asked the Israeli government for air support to help them like drive Hamas out and actually potentially use weapons against them so then they could cement their control over the Gaza Strip. This was actually revealed in a WikiLeaks cable that the Israeli military chief said, no, we want Hamas to win. We want Hamas to win the election because when Hamas wins the election, we can regard everything in Gaza, every man, woman, and child, a hostile entity. And so this was all revealed in WikiLeaks cables, which of course just reiterates how completely important something like WikiLeaks is, because we would never know that this happened. But then, of course, Hamas won, as we know, in 2006 in their first election. And from that point forward, Israel has had a blanket excuse to carpet bomb this caged population whenever they want to, under the pretense that Hamas is a terrorist group, and everything in Gaza is affiliated with Hamas because they elected Hamas. It would be like someone carpet bombing the U.S. and being like, well, you guys elected Trump, and it's just absolutely disgusting. But I think another point that's really important is even though Hamas is the governing entity and they control civil society in terms of like transportation and the electricity, which is only a couple hours a day, there's no potable water and stuff like that, but they are the governing body. They supply the healthcare and things like that. There are several other political organizations. It's not a homogenous unit of control in Gaza. There's Fatah members still there. There's also more conservative members, part of another organization called Islamic Jihad that also engages in resistance acts, armed resistance, and they collaborate sometimes together to launch rockets or whatnot. And then there's also the Pflp. This is a communist group that also does this sometimes. So there's communists in Gaza. It's not just a crazy right-wing militarist society that hates women and subjugates people. It's actually a melting pot. It's a very diverse mosaic of people who are involved in numerous political groups with numerous political affiliations, just like anywhere in the world. And that's the way it is. So it's cartoonishly painted and depicted by Israel as a terrorist organization and dehumanized to the point where people somehow accept that they use quote-unquote civilians as human shields, when in reality, Israel targets civilian infrastructure and human beings and then just can paint them like, well, they're just all Hamas targets because Hamas media building is on the same block, or the Hamas bus stop is right there. It's like, well, yeah, fucking everything is ties to Hamas because Hamas is the government.
Right.
Hypothetically,
if someone wanted to join that communist faction, how would they go about that?
Good question.
Wait.
Good question. Fucking hit them up. I'm sure they have a fucking social media presence.
Anders, are you thinking about doing something? What do you mean?
Yeah, what are you getting at, man?
You'll have to subscribe. People will have to subscribe to the Patreon to figure that out. But I'm a solutions guy, right? We're all solutions people.
I'm a solutions guy as well.
It's a weird word.
I'm a problems girl.
That's one thing I cannot abide.
Well, one problem is, as you're saying, this two-state solution narrative, and I actually had a chance to interview Norman Finkelstein a year ago and I asked him about this because at the time Peter Beinart had just come out and said, "Hey, I want one state." And granted, his was a little different from traditionally what people in BDS talk about. But his response is basically like that this is all academic at this point, and like the law says 2 states, and so like we have to focus on the 2 states, and like I don't want to accept that on the one hand, but I guess I'm still not clear on like by what mechanism, I guess for both, by what mechanism would a 2-state solution ever come about, and why is that probably not feasible or going to happen? And by what mechanism would a 1-state solution, would the end to a full Palestinian rights, being able to have a democracy and a majority, how could that happen?
All right, so it's a great question, and I used to kind of have hope for the 2-state solution until I went to the West Bank myself and saw just how atomized and taken over these little strips of land were that is allegedly supposed to be the future Palestinian state. I mean, it's totally taken over by illegal settlements. It's comprised of like 3 different military areas of control that you have to actually go through checkpoints to get from one Palestinian area to the next. It would be impossible. It wouldn't even make sense if that were made into a Palestinian state, because there's no state to be had. That's why you have entities like Hamas that are painted as this genocidal entity that wants to exterminate Jews and wipe Israel off the map, when really in their charter, they not only denounce anti-Semitism and the conflation of Judaism with Zionism, but they also say we are willing to accept a 2-state solution within the 1967 borders, which means withdrawing settlements to 1967 levels. That's actually what Bernie Sanders was saying during the Democratic primary. Amazingly enough, he was saying he wanted to condition aid until settlements were withdrawn, illegal settlements, and that Palestinians, were able to maintain their homes from those borders. So Hamas is definitely not, not as crazy as people like to think. Like, they actually have a pretty reasonable stance, way more reasonable than Israeli government officials do. They've pledged for years that they want to annex the entire West Bank, and they have no hope for a future Palestinian state. So I don't want to go out there and say this is what I think should happen, but I will say that, I don't want to speak on behalf of Palestinians. Like, I'm sure a lot of Palestinians would accept that. They would accept a 1967 Palestinian state with those borders. But I do know a lot of Palestinians who also think that one state is really the only solution at this point. And that is because of what I was talking about, this sheer atomization and the demolishing of all the land that should be the future Palestinian state. So a 1-state solution would really be easy. It would just be removing this label of this supremacist nation and just having completely equal rights for everyone, lifting the occupation, having people completely coexist and live in peace. Americans, I think that they are under the presumption that there are like 2 states and that they're just constantly warring with each other. If they knew the brutality and reality of the actual Israeli military occupation and the medieval siege on Gaza, I think they would be appalled. And especially if they knew that our government was paying for it and the burden kind of sits on their shoulders. But even when Americans have been polled about this and they are explained the situation, the vast majority will say, well, yeah, of course they should have 1 person, 1 vote, right? 5 million people shouldn't be without democratic rights. Right. So I think it's just a matter of like understanding how far gone it is and what does a democracy really look like? And it doesn't mean the expulsion of Jews. It doesn't mean the elimination of people who live there or the ethnic cleansing of anyone. It just means that everyone can just coexist as it is right now and have democracy. And, people will paint the BDS movement, which is something that I'm proudly part of. And in fact, I'm engaged in litigation against the state of Georgia because Georgia, as well as 30 other states in the U.S., have Israel loyalty pledges that you have to sign in order to work. You have to pledge to never boycott the state of Israel. And so I was given a contract that said this and I refused. And so I'm suing the state. And I encourage everyone to do the same because we need these laws to be knocked down. But I think it shows you how scared they are of the BDS movement because they know this is what successfully. Yes.
You have to support genocide to work at the Coca-Cola Museum? That's not fair.
If you've actually been to the Coca-Cola Museum, that you can tell just on the rides. The way they talk is very, very early Disney-esque, let's say.
It's fucked up.
I know, right? It's super surreal that this is what's happening, but it's because they're so scared of this movement. They're so scared of nonviolent, peaceful resistance that they have gone out of their way to criminalize peaceful activism in this country and solidarity with Palestinians, which is why they've passed these laws in the U.S. and which is why they're scared of this movement, because they know how South Africa apartheid fell. They know how Jim Crow apartheid fell in this country, and it was through peaceful boycotts, the Montgomery bus boycotts. All of these things are constitutionally protected First Amendment rights. It is our right to be able to do this, and we have to do this, in fact, in order to build international pressure. And that's really where the solution lies. And I think that the time is coming, because every time Israel goes on the offense, people, the mass consciousness just spreads like wildfire. But it is primarily, and it needs to primarily come from this government, because as long as this government is providing complete political cover for Israel, it's going to be a long time coming before they hold themselves accountable. And I think we've proven that there is little hope from within Israeli society to do that with their own government. And so it has to come from external pressure. And people, will say, oh, the BDS movement doesn't want Israel to exist. No, well, not in its current form. It doesn't have the right to exist as an apartheid state. And no, we're not talking about sanctioning Israelis and denying them food like Israel does to Gaza residents. We're talking about culturally and politically isolating them from academia, from artistry. This is why we encourage artists to boycott playing in Israel, or politicians and academics to boycott conferences there. And once they are more and more isolated, they will feel more and more pressure to do the right thing and adhere to international law.
All the more reason not to watch that Wonder Woman movie that just came out a couple months ago. It's really bad. But
where's the Justice League's stance on this? They have to excommunicate her.
Yeah.
They care about international law, or they have some unit.
Well, they were formed in the wake of World War II,
right.
as we all know, and let's see.
It's unreal.
Should we talk about this Barry Weiss thing?
Wrap it up. Talking about Barry fucking Weiss.
I mean, I don't really know what to say about this. I don't know anyone that's listening that probably doesn't already know that she's an idiot and she's, indoctrinated with all this stuff. She wrote this piece about how she's like pregnant right now or something, and that somehow makes her feel strongly about how Israel has a right to... There's just always cringe lines that are coming out of this piece that she wrote, like about how she's sort of admitted, like, yeah, some people are going to get killed, but that's just part of Zionism, like, and Zionism's too important, and yada, yada, yada.
Well, it's funny she's talking about her child that she's going to be birthing, I guess, or is it her partner's giving birth? Whatever.
I think it's her.
Okay, because in the video that Abby did, the person on street interviews, there was... This kid who was like 13 or something who said, I am in the organization that that discourages Jews from marrying Arabs. And it's like, it's a very, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if Barry has that mindset of like, we got to preserve the tribe, which...
Can you imagine being in an organization like that? Like spending your weekend nights just... It's like a DSA meeting, but evil.
Right.
Why not just stay home?
Yeah, because people get, like, Americans get, like, oh, we used to have that here, or maybe there still does exist in some pockets, but, like, you'll get that's wrong with, like, miscegenation laws and stuff, but they're literally doing the same thing. I mean, I don't know if they have the law or not. Is it a similar thing, like, with... Trevor Noah, Born a Crime, like, are you allowed to fornicate between Jews and Muslims and create babies? Is that a potential solution, or are they going to crack down on that too?
Oh, I think it's a good point. I know that there was something in place that actually made it hard for Arabs and Jews to marry. I don't know where it's at now, but yeah, there's definitely like KKK equivalents, like just spending their fucking free time going and policing couples and stuff and being like, well, my friend David Sheen, he's married to an Ethiopian Jew, and she gets spit on constantly and like just berated with slurs all the time when they go out together, and and those are Jewish people. It's like it's like white nationalist at its core. Yeah. This is why you have people like Richard Spencer, like or I don't know. I've heard like basically you see all these fucking MAGA chuds, who were like called themselves anti-establishment, like all praising Israel and just becoming state stenographers for it. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, I thought you guys were anti-war and anti-establishment. What happened? But Barry Weiss is a joke. she spent her college years policing Palestinians, trying to rat out like Palestinian students and get professors in trouble for like sympathizing with Palestinians. I mean, she is just absolutely fucking horrible person because she paints herself as like this classical liberal, like a Dave Rubin type.
Yeah.
I mean, she's the one who penned that intellectual dark web article from the New York Times with, the Sam Harris, Joe Rogan crowd, the Weinstein brothers, and then of course herself. And she also was funded by the Israeli government, an organization called Stand With Us. That is just a total propaganda arm of the Israeli government. She was happily accepting money from them to put out propaganda. And now she's painted as like this truth teller who just quit her job at New York Times to start this Substack so she could really just speak the truth, this firebrand, when really, I mean, she's just a total fucking shill. And I just don't get the fascination with her. I guess I get the shared hatred of her and the mockery, but I don't know how she like popped up and is such a prominent voice on the scene. I guess because she's such a detestable figure. But I'll never forget, like, she went on Joe Rogan right after I went on and talked about Palestine, and then Stand With Us, which is an arm of the Israeli government, issued like thousands of letters to him trying to get him to denounce me, and tried to get like an Israeli government official on to debunk my discussion. And then so he refused to do that. But then Barry Weiss came on and did kind of the same thing, where she basically just insinuated that I was anti-Semitic and that people who care disproportionately about Palestine, there must be some reason, right? Because why don't you care about the Uyghurs? Why don't you care about this? It's like, why can't we care about all of it, Barry? But also, this is pretty fucking crazy, right? It was like she was admitting, like, this is crazy, but to care about it more than you do all these other things, like, you must hate Jews. So yeah, she's horrible. She's an absolutely horrible person, and I think that she's just a plant.
Yeah, I mean, her whole it's, and I do often one of the same things, like, who is actually her fan base? Like, I don't get it. I guess I feel like it's baby boomers, like sort of moderate to conservative baby boomers who don't like where most millennials are going. Oh, here's a reasonable, rational millennial in their view. But it is like she wrote this whole book called The New Anti-Semitism, which is a shame that because it has a really beautiful cover, but the book is horrendous. But basically the thing is, all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, and it's this drum they keep banging. And, I get where people sort of get the conclusion that, well, the whole media is just in the tank for Israel. Everyone loves Israel here, and Americans are brainwashed into being Zionists. And that is true to an extent, but I think a lot of it comes from the fact that the Israel lobby is so influential, and there are all these other organs who will do things like write 1,000 letters to Joe Rogan, or, my dad used to work for NPR. He worked in classical music, so don't blame him for the propaganda. But he would say that, like, his friends, every time they said anything remotely critical of Israel, there would be same thing, hundreds of phone calls, thousands of letters coming in. The same does not happen when you say, oh, Palestinians died. Maybe a couple letters from an organization or two, but it's become a really effective way to shut down dissent, because if you're someone like Jeremy Corbyn in the UK, you don't want to be seen as an anti-Semite, right? We really actually care about that stuff as socialists and as anti-racists.
Right.
This matters to us to not be anti-Semitic, and it's a perfect way to screw with and manipulate that. And it got to the point where I feel like in the UK, it wasn't even really about Israel. It was, but it was also about all the other industries, all the industry there, and people who didn't want a socialist government, and they hit this anti-Semitism drum, and the left was defensive because they don't want to be accused of this. We don't have a good enough answer for it.
Yeah, it's a disgrace what they did to Corbyn. Disgusting.
Let's bring this to kind of a button on. I think this is probably a good way to sum this up, because I think what we're talking about, honestly, like at the molecular level, is about power in some way, because. I guess also speaking of Rogan, and something that happened with his opener, this guy Tony Hinchcliffe this week. I guess I can't help but make this parallel, because I think about this all the times in terms of all these stupid fucking arguments that we get into in our fucking scene, in our industry or whatever, about whether it's okay to say a racist joke or cancel somebody or whatever. Blah, blah, blah. I think that what's common between what Israel's doing and what the police do here and what everyone in power historically has done is this thing where you, and also why is Barry Weiss popular, right? Is this thing where you sort of like frame the narrative of what's happening as you are a victim and the other person is actually the perpetrator. It's this weird inside-out thing. And if you go back through like all war history and like war propaganda and stuff, it's always the country that is enacting domination on some other fucking state is like, they are coming to get us. This has to happen. It fucking, Nazi Germany. I mean, it was, the people that were indoctrinated in that shit were kind of conceiving of all these people that they were exterminating as like a threat. People don't like to think of it that way. We like to think of this stuff as essentialistic and these people are just evil, there's good and bad people or whatever. But I mean, I guess the reason I draw this parallel with comedians is because I always fucking notice that like when this guy, I'm not gonna drag us too far through this and get us into arguments online or whatever, but it's everyone right now is arguing about this guy who he just made some fucking, racist, like, Asian stereotype jokes about another comedian, and like, and then the guy took a video of it, and he got caught or whatever, and then people were arguing about it, and
they weren't even jokes; they were just racial slurs.
I'll go as far as to say he was working off of presence and energy, and it's like, I know what he was doing is he was inverting the energy. Oh, we just had a whole woke set, I'm gonna turn it the other way, and that's the fucking bit, right? And I'm sure it was funny, like, to the people in the room, but the thing is, like, it's still, if you're not cool with that guy, if you don't have his consent to do that, then what you are is you're making comedy out of a power dynamic, which is that you're white and he's fucking Chinese in America, and that's where the humor in that comes from. It's mean humor, and it only works if you have the consent from the guy. But so this guy's been sort of like reframing this as, the way we always do with this stuff is like, he's the victim of everyone's trying to get him now or whatever. But on a base level, like, the way you sell this stuff is just, I'm actually the hero of this story. Someone is coming to get me, the victim here, the person that is being sort of like punched at, is actually punching back at me. And you see this with like police who are like, police have this big victim complex in America where they're like, they don't know how hard my job is and stuff. And
there's a war on blue lives.
Yeah. And I think with Barry Weiss, the reason people probably like her is because, like, I have dumb friends who I'm still friends with on social media who share her and all the fucking stupid pundits that are, essentially similar to her, and that they trick liberals and stuff into thinking that they're good. And it's just, I think that they think that she's progressive on the basis of, like, I don't know, like identity or something like that, and I don't know, they just believe it. They just believe her fucking bullshit. I don't even know how to put a cap on this, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's like the fetishism of being realistic or reasonable, the idea of it more so than the actual points themselves, because she is fanatical, but because she's pushing back against what's perceived to be an affront to their status, or often there are things that maybe people are accused of that are wrongful, and there's someone actually speaking out against that. It doesn't, they might not see the full picture behind what's motivating her.
Yeah.
I think people get easily confused about this, but it's actually very simple. There's nothing bigoted about opposing race supremacy, whether it's white Americans here or white Jews in Israel. Don't fall for the obvious ploy to make this about something else, but another time or another place. This is obvious ethnic cleansing.
Yeah.
And you guys, I'm so sorry, I gotta go, but thank you so much for having me on. It was really fun, and please check out Gaza Fights for Freedom for free on YouTube. Go to GazaFightsForFreedom.com, check out Media Roots Radio and Empire Files for all of our shit on Palestine. We've done so much work, and now is the time, really, like, we have to spread this information and get this consciousness spreading, because we only have moments like this. It's rare. It's few and far between that people even give a shit and are like ready to hear it. And so that's our job. People who care, who are anti-racist, socialists and leftists, we need to seize this opportunity and join these movements and, push the truth forward. So thank you so much for doing that. I really appreciate you guys having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for joining us. I think we're done anyway, so that's perfect. All right. Well, without further ado, see you around. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, guys. Peace.
All right. Let's do plugs. Alex, you have anything?
Yes, Jake. If you enjoyed this discourse on the intricacies of the Middle East, you will love my Dragon Ball comedy podcast, Ballin' Out Super, where we discuss Goku and his is he a bad guy? You'll have to listen to find out. And that's Ballin' Out Super. You can follow me on Twitter at Patak Jokes, and that's it for me, Jake.
Anders, you got anything?
At Andersley here on Twitter, Dursley on Instagram. Check out Redacted Tonight on YouTube and Portable.tv. Also, anyone in the Middle East, please join the Pflp. They need your help and support. I'm trying to find a link, but they don't make it easier to join, I guess. They have a Wikipedia page.
Yeah, I'm on Al Qaeda's website, and they do not let you just sign up there. It's crazy.
This is not Al Qaeda. I will think we should clarify. But if you're in America, please, and in Philadelphia specifically, please do everything you can to keep Larry Krasner in office. It'll be close. There are thousands of Republicans in Philadelphia who have switched their registration because it's a closed primary, who will likely be voting for his opponent, who is going to undo basically all the good stuff that Krasner has been able to do over the past 3-4 years. I've been watching this documentary, Philly DA, and it's really fascinating. All the changes that have been able to make, and the changes that judges and other prosecutors just stand in the way of and just say no because of their small little egos. So please do everything you can to get him reelected. Donate, volunteer, and please, if you're in Philly, go out and vote.
Okay, so yeah, we have merch, Big Cartel website in the show notes, and we have a Patreon if you're a new listener and you want to listen to bonus episodes and talk to us on Discord and stuff like that, and hang out with our community. I have a live show in New York at the B Cafe a week from now, next Friday, the 21st. I will put up stuff on Twitter about it, so you can find out where it is and when it is and stuff. But that's fun. So if you're one of my enemies from the internet and you want to come try to kill me, it's at the B Cafe on the 21st in Manhattan.
Take my life, please.
I think that's it. It's Intifada'd. Nice.